Friends, hi there. Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. The major characters of the novel. Let us find out who they are, what they symbolize, and why Dostoevsky needed every one of them. This explainer is a complete character by character analysis of crime and punishment, their symbolic roles, metaphorical meaning, and how Dostoevsky arranged them as a moral argument. To build the character web, Dostoevsky uses them as four forces in the novel. So let us begin. Most people think crime and punishment is about a murder. It is not. It is about eight people, eight very specific, very different human beings, whom Dostoevsky arranged around one central question like pieces on a chessboard. The question is this: what does a human being look like? What does their soul look like when they are governed by pride, by faith, by emptiness, by love, by calculation, by innocent suffering? Every character in this novel is an answer to that question. Every character is an argument Dostoevsky is making. And when you understand what each one of them actually represents, not just what they do in the plot, but what they symbolize at the deepest level, the novel transforms. It stops being a story about 19th century Russia. It becomes a map of every possible way a human being can respond to the same impossible situation. Today, we are going through all eight of them, every major character, their role, their symbolic meaning, their metaphorical function, and why Dostoevsky absolutely needed each one of them to make his argument work. By the end of this video, you will not just understand the characters, you will see yourself in them. That is what great literature does, and crime and punishment is the greatest. The four forces. Before we meet the characters individually, I want to give you the roadmap. Dostoevsky arranged his characters into four distinct moral forces, and once you see this structure, you cannot unsee it. Force 1, the protagonist, Raskolnikov, the divided self, pride at war with conscience, at the center, not quite hero, not quite villain, the battleground where every other force operates, the novel's experiment and its question. Force 2, redemptive forces, Sonya and Dunya. Sonya, faith through suffering. Dunya, moral courage in action. The forces pulling Raskolnikov towards humanity, confession, and renewal. Both women, both subjected to tremendous pressure, both unbroken. They are what the novel proposes as an answer. Force 3, shadow, manipulation, and the externalized conscience. Svidrigailov, Luzhin, Porfiry Petrovich. Svidrigailov, the void. Luzhin, self-interest as virtue, and the externalized conscience, Porfiry Petrovich. Three very different men, all of whom place themselves outside ordinary moral obligation for very different reasons, with very different results. They are the warning signs posted around Raskolnikov's possible future. Force 4, societies crushed, Alyona Ivanovna and Lizaveta. Alyona is the theory's target, Lizaveta the theory's refutation. Two women who barely speak, who exist at the bottom of every social hierarchy, and who carry between them the moral weight of the entire novel. Alyona tests the theory, Lizaveta destroys it. With that map in hand, let us meet each one. The protagonist, Raskolnikov, Rodion Romanovich Raskolnikov, former law student, 23 years old, living in a coffin-shaped room in St. Petersburg. So poor, he owes months of rent to his landlady and has pawned almost everything he owns, barely eating, not sleeping, withdrawn from every person who cares about him. On the surface, a man broken by poverty and isolation. Underneath, something far more interesting and far more dangerous. And that division is the engine of everything. On one side of the crack, his cold, brilliant, ruthless intellect, the part that has constructed a theory, the part that believes he might be extraordinary, the part that is capable of planning a murder and executing it with clinical precision. On the other side, his heart, the part that gives his last coins to strangers, that carries a dying drunk home, that weeps in a childhood dream over a beaten horse, that loves his mother and his sister with a ferocity that terrifies him. His theory, the one he published in a small journal before the novel begins, divides all of humanity into two groups: the ordinary, who live within the moral law and always will, and the extraordinary, the Napoleons, the Newtons, the great movers of history, who have a natural right to transgress that law if their purpose demands it. Napoleon killed hundreds of thousands, and history called him great. Raskolnikov wants to kill one predatory pawnbroker and calls it philosophy. But the theory has a trap inside it, one that Raskolnikov does not see until it is too late. The theory requires a self-test. You cannot know in advance which category you belong to. You find out by attempting the act. If you can cross the line and bear it, you are extraordinary. If you cannot, you are ordinary. And the act will destroy you from inside. The murder is not primarily about money. It is not primarily about Alyona. It is a man conducting an experiment on himself with an axe. And the result of the experiment is the opposite of everything he hoped. What does Raskolnikov symbolize? He is the portrait of the modern secular intellectual, brilliant, isolated, contemptuous of ordinary life, who has replaced God and moral law with a private philosophy, and who then discovers that the philosophy cannot bear the weight of a real human act. He symbolizes what happens when a person is intelligent enough to construct a perfect argument for crossing a moral line, but not wise enough to understand that the moral line is not a social convention. It is a fact about what human beings are. He symbolizes the gap between knowing and doing, between the compassion he believes in intellectually and the compassion he is incapable of living. He knows before the murder that compassion is the only law of human existence. He knows it, and he kills anyway. And he symbolizes resurrection because his name means a crack, a schism, and it is through that crack eventually that the light gets in. The division that made him capable of the murder is also the division through which Sonya reaches him. He cannot be reached through his intellect. He can only be reached through the part of him that was never part of the theory. Raskolnikov is the most complete portrait of a certain kind of brilliant, dangerous, self-destroying human being that literature has ever produced. And the terrible thing, the thing that makes him immortal, is that you understand him completely, even while he is walking to the pawnbroker's apartment with a hatchet. That is Dostoevsky's genius. He makes the monster comprehensible. Redemptive Force 1, Sonya Marmeladova. Sofia Semyonovna Marmeladova. Everyone calls her Sonya. She is a registered prostitute, the daughter of a broken alcoholic. She lives in a tiny room and sells herself so her stepmother's children do not starve. She is publicly shamed. She is legally categorized. She is, by every measure that St. Petersburg society uses, at the very bottom. And she is the moral center of the novel, not despite her situation, not in spite of what she endures through it, because of it. Her suffering is not what makes her weak. It is what has made her, paradoxically, the strongest person in the book. Her name tells us everything. Sophia, from the Greek Sophia, means wisdom. Not the wisdom of books or theories or academic argument. The wisdom of the heart. The wisdom that knows what matters and refuses to let go of it regardless of the cost. What does Sonya symbolize? She symbolizes voluntary suffering. The choice to bear pain for love rather than escape it at any cost. Raskolnikov's theory says, step over the obstacle, rise above, place yourself beyond ordinary moral constraint. Sonia's life says something entirely opposite. Go down into the suffering, accept it, bear it for others, and in doing so, remain fully, completely, undestroyably human. She is the novel's living proof that Raskolnikov's theory is wrong, not in argument, but in fact. He tried to rise above suffering through an act of will. She descended into suffering through an act of love. After everything, after his murder, his fever, his months of psychological torture, Raskolnikov is barely alive inside. After everything Sonya has endured, she is more alive than anyone. She is also the externalized conscience when Raskolnikov confesses to her, and he confesses to her before he confesses to the police. Her response is the most important line in the novel. She does not ask what he did. She asks what he has done to himself. She sees through the crime to the wound beneath it. She sees the soul, not the act. Sonya is the Lazarus figure, but reversed. In the Bible story that she reads aloud to Raskolnikov, Lazarus is the one raised from the dead. In the novel's symbolic structure, Sonya is the voice at the entrance of the tomb. She is the one calling the dead man back. She does not do this through argument or accusation or clever psychology. She does it through presence, through love that makes no conditions, through faith that does not waver even when the person she loves confesses to a double murder. The cypress wood cross is the single most precisely constructed symbol in the novel. It belongs to Lizaveta, the innocent woman Raskolnikov killed. Sonya and Lizaveta had exchanged crosses as a sign of spiritual sisterhood. When Sonya gives Raskolnikov Lizaveta's cross at the moment of his confession, she is creating a chain, the murdered innocent, to the faithful woman who loved her, to the murdered who destroyed her, toward redemption. Lizaveta's cross is what accompanies Raskolnikov to the crossroads, what he holds when he kneels in the dirt, what he carries into the police station, the innocent blood that demands confession and enables it. Sonya follows him to Siberia. She does not have to. She has no obligation. She has already given more than anyone could ask. She follows because love in Dostoevsky's word is not a feeling that comes and goes. It is a decision made in the face of every reason not to make it, and then made again every morning, regardless of what the morning brings. The prisoners in the camp call her little mother. Raskolnikov is despised. Sonya is beloved. That contrast is not accidental. It is the answer to the extraordinary man theory, written not in philosophical argument, but in the daily social reality of a Siberian prison camp. Redemptive force 2, Avdotia Romanovna, called Dunya. Avdotia Romanovna Raskolnikova, Raskolnikov's sister. Everyone calls her Dunya. She is young, beautiful, proud, and brilliantly intelligent. She has been working as a governess at the estate of a man named Svidrigailov, who pursued her obsessively, slandered her when she refused him, and destroyed her reputation. Now she has agreed to marry Luzhin, a man she does not love, does not respect, and sees through immediately, because the money from this marriage will fund her brother's education and stabilize her family. She knows exactly what she is doing. Her eyes are completely open. She is not naive, not fooled, not manipulated. She has looked at her options and made a calculation of love. Most readers remember her as Raskolnikov's sister. That is one of literary history's great underestimates. Dunya is Raskolnikov's most precise mirror. The same pride that borders on arrogance, the same refusal to accept the world as it is. They are made of the same material. But where Raskolnikov channels all of that into a sealed philosophical system that ends in murder, Dunya channels it into love, into action for others, into a moral courage that never requires a theory to justify it. What does Dunya symbolize? She symbolizes the answer to Raskolnikov's theory, but from inside the same personality type. She proves that the qualities that made Raskolnikov capable of crossing the moral line, the intelligence, the pride, the absolute refusal to submit, do not require transgression. The same energy directed by love instead of ideology produced something entirely different. She also symbolizes what Dostoevsky believed about women, which was more radical for his time than it sounds now. Dunya is not a victim, not a passive beauty waiting to be saved. Every man who tries to use her, Svidrigailov, Luzhin, even Raskolnikov in his patronizing protectiveness, discovers that she is more than capable of handling herself. She sees through Luzhin's immediately and expels him without hesitation. She ends the engagement that was supposed to be her family's salvation, because she will not be owned by a man she despises, even at financial cost. And then there is the revolver scene. Svidrigailov traps her in his apartment. He reveals what he knows about Raskolnikov. He declares his obsession. He has her locked in. She produced a revolver. She has come prepared. She fires. twice, misses once, grazes him once. This is the most important symbolic moment in Dunya's arc, and I want you to understand why. Raskolnikov's theory says that greatness requires transgression, crossing the line, stepping over. The extraordinary man must be willing to do what ordinary people cannot. Dunya in this room achieves something genuinely extraordinary. She defeats one of the most powerful, most dangerous men in the novel and walks out of a locked room free. And she does it with a completely clean conscience. She has not crossed any line. She has defended herself. She has told the truth. She has refused to yield. The revolver in her hand is the symbol of a moral courage that does not require Raskolnikov's philosophy. The theory said you need transgression to be extraordinary. Dunya is extraordinary, and she achieves it entirely with the moral law. Her choice of Razumikhin is the novel's quite happy ending, the one that does not announce itself as an ending. Razumikhin represents warm, practical, human reason, opposite of the sealed, cold, ideological reason that consumed Raskolnikov. Dunya choosing him freely, of her own will, without pressure or obligation, is the novel's demonstration of what love in good faith looks like. Not sacrifice under coercion, free choice between equals. Together, Sonya and Dunya form the novel's complete portrait of female moral strength. Sonya goes down into suffering through faith. Dunya meets every threat with courage. One is contemplative, one is active. One reaches Raskolnikov's soul. One fights off the men who would destroy everything around him. Dostoevsky needed both of them, and the novel would collapse without either. The Shadow, Arkady Ivanovich Svidrigailov. Arkady Ivanovich Svidrigailov, wealthy landowner, former military officer, a man of considerable charm. He arrives in St. Petersburg with his hat in his hand, claiming to want to make amends to Dunya, to clear her name, to right the wrong he did to her. And underneath all of that easy charm, behind those calm light blue eyes that everyone who meets him finds vaguely disturbing without being able to say why. Nothing, a vast suffocating nothing. Svidrigailov has done what Raskolnikov's theory promises. He has crossed every moral line. He has freed himself from conscience. He has placed himself beyond ordinary moral constraint. He has been doing this for years, at length, with complete thoroughness. And what he found on the other side of that freedom is the thing that makes him the most terrifying character in the novel. Not because he is monstrous, but because he is simply empty. What does Svidrigailov symbolize? He is Raskolnikov's dark double, the completed version of what Raskolnikov might become if the theory wins fully. He is the extraordinary man who actually succeeded, who genuinely freed himself from conscience and convention, who crossed every line and found that the freedom on the other side is indistinguishable from spiritual death. He is the answer to the question Raskolnikov is asking through the entire novel. If the theory is correct, if the extraordinary man can step over moral law and bear it, what does that person look like after 10 years? What is their life like? What do their days feel like? Svidrigailov is that answer. He fills his emptiness with young women, with cards, with drink, with the observation of human cruelty. None of it means anything. Nothing reaches him. Nothing sticks. But here is where Dostoevsky is more subtle than you might expect. Svidrigailov is not purely evil. He performs a genuine acts of generosity. He pays for Katerina Ivanovna's funeral. He arranges care for the orphan children. He gives Sonya money on his final night. He distributes what remains of his wealth. These acts are real. The children genuinely benefit, and yet the generosity feels wrong, not because it is secretly cruel, but because it is completely disconnected from any feeling. He gives the way you might wind a clock, mechanically, without investment, without continuity. The final charitable act of a man who has decided to stop. His final night is one of the most carefully constructed sequences in the novel. He has terrible hallucinatory dreams, a drowned girl, then a small child sheltering from the cold whose face transforms as he watches into something leering and corrupt. These are the things his conscience suppressed, returning in the only hours when the suppression cannot hold. He sees them clearly. He has no defenses left. At dawn, he walks out into freezing rain. He stops a night watchman near an old stone tower. The watchman asks where he is going. America, he says, and shoots himself in the temple. America is the 19th century's image of the blank slate, the place beyond, where you go when you have exhausted every option in the world you know. He is not going anywhere. He is simply stopping. There is no America. There is nowhere left to go after you have crossed every line and found nothing awaiting. That same morning, the same dawn, Raskolnikov walks into the police station and confesses. Two men, one morning, one ends, one begins. Dostoevsky arranges this with complete deliberateness. Svidrigailov is the warning posted at the end of the road Raskolnikov was traveling. Look, this is what that road leads to. Not power, not freedom, not Napoleon. A night watchman in freezing rain and a word for a place that does not exist. The manipulator, Fyodor Petrovich Luzhin. Fyodor Petrovich Luzhin, middle-aged lawyer, civil servant, self-made man. He has worked hard, accumulated money and position, risen through the ranks of respectable St. Petersburg's society. And from all of this, he has drawn one unshakable conclusion. He is, in some fundamental sense, a good person. He arrives to meet his fiancée's family, the family of Raskolnikov, whose education his money will fund, with the confidence of a man who has never seriously been told no. Every person in the room dislikes him within 2 minutes. Luzhin has a theory. It is simpler than Raskolnikov's theory, but it has the same architecture. He argues that love yourself first is the foundation of all social good. If every individual pursues their own rational self-interest completely, the sum of those interests produces a functioning, prosperous society. Self-love is not merely permissible, it is the highest moral duty. Raskolnikov attacks this immediately, and here is the delicious irony that Dostoevsky builds into the scene. Raskolnikov is right about Luzhin. He correctly identifies that this philosophy justifies any crime as long as it serves the self, and in doing so, he is describing his own philosophy. The grand Napoleonic theory and the petty self-serving calculation are the same architecture. One wears a philosopher's coat, one wears a bureaucrat's uniform. The logic inside is identical. What does Luzhin symbolize? He symbolizes Raskolnikov's theory without the grandeur, without the Napoleon fantasy, without the intellectual pretension. He is what the extraordinary man theory looks like when it is lived by a small man for small purpose, where Raskolnikov wants to transcend morality for historical greatness. Luzhin wants to transcend it to get a beautiful, grateful, economically dependent wife. He also symbolizes what Dostoevsky found most contemptible about the utilitarian liberal philosophy sweeping Russia in his time. The way it dressed up cruelty as reasonableness. Luzhin does not think of himself as a predator. He thinks of himself as a provider. He is not buying Dunya. He is rescuing her. He is not manipulating her family. He is being generous. The gap between how he sees his actions and what his actions actually are is the gap between his philosophy and reality. His attempt to destroy Sonya is the moment that reveals him completely. He plants money in her pocket at Marmeladova's funeral dinner and then publicly accuses her of theft. The calculation is clinical and cold. Sonya is a registered prostitute. Her word will not be believed against a respectable civil servant. If the accusation succeeds, she is destroyed. And with her destroyed, Raskolnikov loses his most important connection to confession and humanity. He does not hate Sonya. That is the point. He simply finds her inconvenient. She is an obstacle, and he has selected the most cost-effective method of removal. This is rational self-interest applied to human beings with perfect consistency. A young socialist named Lebeziatnikov, who witnessed Luzhin plant the money, stands up and says what he saw. That is all. And Luzhin's entire edifice, the respectability, the carefully constructed position, the whole performance of the generous benefactor collapses in a public room, exposed by a man Luzhin had been condescending to for weeks. And here is the final satirical stroke that Dostoevsky delivers with Luzhin. He walks out of that room disgraced and disappears from the novel. He is not arrested. He is not punished. He is not even significantly changed. He will find another vulnerable woman in another ruined family and begin again. His theory will survive because his theory never required anything of him, only that he look after the most dangerous moral failures, Dostoevsky is saying, are not the dramatic ones. They are the ones that wear a good coat and quote economics and are never quite guilty of anything you can name. Raskolnikov commits a spectacular crime and is destroyed by it. Luzhin commits a quite respectable ongoing series of smaller cruelties and walks away entirely intact. That contrast is not comforting. It is meant to disturb you. The Mirror. Porfiry Petrovich. Porfiry Petrovich, the magistrate investigating the murders, a round-faced, jovial man who rambles, who seems to forget what he was saying, who laughs easily, who treats Raskolnikov with what looks like warm intellectual respect. He is the most unusual detective in all of literature because he is not primarily a detective at all. He knows Raskolnikov is the murderer by their first extended conversation. He has almost no physical evidence and he does not arrest him for most of the novel. Why? Because Porfiry has understood something about this case that goes beyond the legal question of who committed the act. He has understood what the act means to the person who committed it, and he understands that a forced confession produces a man in a cell who still believes his theory was right. A voluntary confession, one that comes from the person's own recognition of what they have done and who they have become, produces something else entirely. What does Porfiry symbolize? He is Raskolnikov's externalized conscience, the part of Raskolnikov's own mind that already knows the truth, that has known it since before the axe fell. Given a face, a voice, a legal title, Raskolnikov answers and immediately knows he has said too much. The article, the public philosophical confession of motive, is sitting in Porfiry's hands before the investigation has formally begun. In the second meeting, Porfiry discusses the psychology of criminals at length, how they return to the scene, how they give themselves away not through evidence but through behavior. He is describing Raskolnikov to Raskolnikov's face while pretending to theories in general. The meeting ends with a shocking intrusion. A tradesman appears and calls Raskolnikov a murderer, then vanishes. An ambiguous theatrical moment that Porfiry may or may not have arranged, and whose very ambiguity is itself a form of pressure. In the third and final meeting, Porfiry arrives alone, without papers, without any official pretext, and he drops every performance. He speaks plainly, I know it was you, not because of the physical evidence, psychologically. There is simply no other explanation that accounts for everything. And then he does something extraordinary. He urges Raskolnikov to confess voluntarily, not as a threat, as a genuine, almost fatherly advice. You are young, he says. You might get 8 years. You will come back. But if you are caught, instead of going forward yourself, there is no softening in that. Go now, while there is still time. This is not the behavior of a man who wants to triumph. This is the behavior of a man who has spent months in close psychological proximity to a brilliant, suffering, self-destroying young person, and who genuinely wants him to live rather than perish. Porfiry's final act is an act of mercy, not legal mercy, human mercy. He gives Raskolnikov the chance to choose his own way back. And contrast with this Svidrigailov, who also holds Raskolnikov's secret and does something entirely different with it. Svidrigailov uses the knowledge as leverage, as power, as a card to play against Dunya. Porfiry uses it as a tool for liberation. Both men know the truth. One exploits it, one tries to heal with it. That contrast, intelligence without conscience versus intelligence in service of conscience, is one of the novel's most carefully arranged symmetries. Porfiry never arrests Raskolnikov. He never even formally accuses him in their conversations. He simply holds up a mirror and waits with complete patience and complete certainty for Raskolnikov to look into it long enough to see himself clearly. The truth, Dostoevsky is saying, does not need to be forced. It only needs to be reflected. The conscience is always confessing. You just need someone who knows how to listen. Society is crushed. Alyona Ivanovna and Lizaveta, two women who together occupy fewer pages than any other major character in the novel. Two women who barely speak. Two women who carry between them the entire moral weight of everything that happens. Society is crushed, Part 1. Alyona Ivanovna. The theory's target, the moral test object, the pawnbroker, small, thin, sharp eyes, punishing interest rates, cold and suspicious, universally disliked. Dostoevsky makes her as difficult to defend as possible and then shows that it makes no difference. Dostoevsky describes Alyona without sentimentality. She is a predatory pawnbroker who preys on the desperate. She exploits Lizaveta. She hoards money she will never use. The young students in the tavern, whose conversation Raskolnikov overhears, discuss her with undisguised contempt. Dostoevsky gives Raskolnikov every possible advantage in constructing the case for her murder, and then he shows that the case falls apart anyway. What does Alyona symbolize? She is the theory's test object that Raskolnikov must first dehumanize before he can kill. She is the louse, the abstraction, the variable in the question, and the fact that she must be turned into an abstraction before she can be harmed. And the fact that she must be turned into an abstraction before she can be harmed is itself the novel's argument. The moment you can look at another human being and see a calculation instead of a person, you have already crossed the line that matters most. Society is crushed. Part 2. Lizaveta Ivanovna. The theory's refutation. Innocent suffering incarnate. Alyona's half-sister, gentle, simple-minded, exploited by her own sister, friends with Sonya. She walks in at the wrong moment. She raises one arm. That arm is the most important gesture in the novel. Lizaveta is the proof that the theory is wrong. Not the philosophical proof, not the logical refutation, the human proof. A person who has no place in the calculation, who fits nowhere in the architecture of extraordinary men and useful targets, who simply walks through a door at the wrong moment with a bundle of laundry. She raises her arm to protect herself. She does not scream. She does not fight. She does not threaten him. She simply makes herself small against the wall. A gesture of absolute helplessness before absolute violence. That gesture is the moment the extraordinary man theory dies completely. There is no philosophical framework that contains Lizaveta. There is no arithmetic of suffering that balances her death against anything. She is simply an innocent woman who came home at the wrong moment, and he kills her, and the theory has no answer for that, no answer at all. She haunts the novel more than Alyona ever does. Raskolnikov can maintain a certain cold distance from the murder of the pawnbroker. He can dress it in theory, in necessity, in the language of social utility. He cannot maintain that distance from Lizaveta. Her face keeps returning. It is Lizaveta who breaks through the ideology. And there is one more thing, the thing that connects her to everything. Lizaveta and Sonya were friends. They had exchanged crosses as a sign of spiritual sisterhood. When Raskolnikov kills Lizaveta, he has not just murdered an innocent woman. He has struck at the very principle Sonya represents. And when Sonya gives him Lizaveta's cross to carry to his confession, the cypress wood cross that will go with him to the crossroads, to the police station, to Siberia. The chain is complete. The innocent blood of the woman he killed is what leads him home. That is not symbolism in the decorative sense. That is the deepest theology of the novel made visible in a single object changing hands. The moral architecture. Now let us step back and see the whole thing at once. Dostoevsky did not write 8 separate characters. He wrote a single moral argument, and he divided it into 8 human beings. Raskolnikov is the question. Every other character is an answer. Sonya shows him what voluntary suffering looks like when it is chosen for love, and that it does not destroy the person who chooses it. It purifies them. He is his path back. Dunya shows him that the qualities that made him capable of the murder, the intelligence, the pride, the absolute refusal to yield, could have been wielded entirely differently. They are not the problem. The problem is what they were in service of. Svidrigailov shows him where his road leads if he keeps going. The extraordinary man theory fully lived, the freedom fully achieved, and the discovering that there is no one there, that freedom from conscience is not peace but annihilation. Luzhin shows him what his philosophy looks like in a smaller, pettier man, stripped of the Napoleon fantasy and reduced to its true function: permission to harm people for your own benefit without feeling guilty about it. Porfiry shows him his own conscience, externalized, patient, inexhaustible, knowing everything, waiting for him to catch up to what he already knows. Eleona gives the theory its best possible target, and the theory fails even then, because the act of dehumanizing her, of turning her into a louse, is itself the moral crime. And Lizaveta, with one raised arm, in one moment, without a single word, destroys the theory entirely. This is what separates Dostoevsky from every other novelist who ever addressed the same ideas. He does not argue against rationalism. He does not write essays. He does not debate philosophers. He creates people, eight very specific, very human, very alive people, and he arranges them around one central figure who is trying to live by an idea, and he watches what happens. And what happens is the novel. 500 pages of what happens when ideas meet human beings, when philosophy meets a raised arm, when the extraordinary man theory meets Lizaveta's face, when pride meets the tears in Siberia, when the theory meets Sonya, faith, and cannot survive the encounter. The question the novel leaves you with, the one that Dostoevsky never answers directly because it cannot be answered directly, is this: which of these eight people do you most recognize in yourself? And what does that tell you about the direction you are traveling? Now, at the end, let me tell you about another important character of the novel. He is Semyon Zakharovich Marmeladov, Sonia's father, a ruined alcoholic civil servant. He is a figure of pitiable self-awareness. He knows exactly what he is and what he has done to his family, yet cannot stop. He metaphorically represents the crushing weight of a society that produces self-destruction and then punishes it. His deathbed scene is one of the novel's most wrenching passages. Marmeladov is the first mirror Raskolnikov encounters in a tavern, before the crime, before any other character appears. He is a ruined civil servant who has destroyed his family through alcoholism, forced Sonya into prostitution, and knows all of this with agonizing, eloquent, total clarity. He speaks beautifully. He understands precisely what he is, and then he goes back to the tavern. He symbolizes conscience without will, the specific tragedy of complete self-knowledge that produces no change. Sitting in that tavern, Raskolnikov is listening to a prophecy about himself, the brilliant mind that sees itself and is paralyzed by what it sees. Crucial difference is that Raskolnikov still has a will. The murder is its final monstrous expression. Marmeladov also delivers the novel's first theological statement, his vision of God forgiving the degraded precisely because they never considered themselves worthy of forgiveness. He dies having received Sonia's forgiveness, loved anyway, despite everything.